When you're elected, you swear an oath to the citizens of this country to act in their best interests. And the idea that you would go and be rubbing shoulders with the Chinese Communist Party and that you would take a bunch of money from them to put on this event, like, you don't think they have an agenda? You think they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart?
Ladies and gentlemen, I usually like to keep it professional, keep it respectful when we're dealing with politicians, but this one I have to break out of the mold just a little bit. We have an absolute dog joining the show today. We have a man who's been in politics for well over 15 years, working in the community and helping his constituents. He will crawl over broken glass to make sure that they have a better life. A man who's graduated from the University of Victoria and the University of St. Francis Xavier University. And man, we love to have him. A man with the biggest arms, the biggest charm, Mayor of Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Brad West. Thank you. Welcome to the show, sir. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I gotta tell you, I've had introductions before, but that is someone else. I gotta get you out to Poco and just have you do this for me regularly.
You got it. Next event, I'll be the one who brings you up on stage. Let's go. It's a huge pleasure to have you on, sir. You've been catching headlines. You've been doing so much for your constituency, as well as talking on the federal level of what's been happening across our country when it comes to crime and that not really being dealt with, because quite frankly, you're on the front lines of a lot of it happening at this point in time in your community in Port Coquitlam, BC. I do want to kind of get people up to speed of the things that you've been experiencing. First off, what you're seeing in your community, and then secondly, how that's been impacting your family directly as you've been taking a stand for it.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. It is an issue I feel really strongly about because I think it is so basic to society and to people and to families, a sense of security, a sense of safety. And, it is basically one of the key responsibilities of government to make sure people feel safe. And by any measure, government is failing in this regard. My experience kind of dates back to when I first got elected. It was in 2018 when I was first elected mayor. And shortly after that, I spoke out very publicly in British Columbia about a situation where an organization called the Union of BC Municipalities, which represents all mayors and city councillors across the province, was involved in a cash for access agreement with the Chinese Communist Party. They host a convention every year and they bring together, a couple thousand elected officials in British Columbia. And they were actually taking financial sponsorship from the Chinese Communist Party to put on that event. And then they allowed the Chinese Communist Party to have a reception where they could wine and dine politicians. And just on the face of it, I thought that is just completely wrong. When you're elected, you swear an oath to the citizens of this country to act in their best interests. And the idea that you would go and be rubbing shoulders with the Chinese Communist Party and that you would take a bunch of money from them to put on this event, like, you don't think they have an agenda? You think they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart? Of course they have an agenda, and it's very well documented. And we see it not only in Canada, we see it in other countries as well, Australia very notably. And the other element of this was, at that particular time, China was holding two of our fellow citizens hostage, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And so, I mean, I don't know, I'm not the smartest guy around, but where I come from, you don't go and break bread with the hostage takers if someone's got a member of your family. And that's how I think of fellow Canadians and fellow citizens. We're a family. And so I spoke out very publicly about that. Got a lot of media attention here in BC. And from that moment on, both myself and my family have had to deal with harassment and threats, primarily linked back to the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not special in that regard. They do this to many other people, They do it to anyone who they view as a threat. Um, you know, it is staggering to think that in this country, we've had news reports that the Chinese Communist Party is operating police stations in Canada. Do you think for a nanosecond that Canada could have a RCMP police station in China? It's not even in the realm of possibility, and yet it happens here. So that has kind of been my first exposure to dealing with threats and harassment. But it hasn't caused me to stop speaking out in any way because I think that that's part of my responsibility. And one of the things that happened more recently, and it was not connected to the Chinese Communist Party, it just was an individual who's just a deranged individual, unfortunately, someone who is very unwell, who, over a period of time, engaged in a series of escalating threats to me and my family that culminated in their arrest when they said that they were going to kill me, they were going to kill my family, they had a gun, and police went and checked it out, and the individual had what was a replica gun, but that person was arrested, and I'll tell you, I had to fight like hell to get him charged. The system is so predisposed to just making excuses for people, and I had Crown prosecutors basically trying to talk me out of having this person charged, and they were using all sorts of excuses about why this person shouldn't be held accountable, why they shouldn't take responsibility for their actions. But I've got two young children, I got a wife, and it's easy for some bureaucrat or someone who's part of the system to say, oh yeah, well, oh, the person wasn't serious, really that serious, or it was only a replica gun. When I'm out in the community at a playground park with my kids, my wife, what I'm supposed to just kind of accept that level of risk. So I just, that was a very small taste of what so many Canadians have to deal with, which is a system that is got the pendulum swung so far in the direction of the person who's done wrong, and and just seems incapable of holding them accountable and responsible for their actions. And so I spoke out about that. I thought it was important. And I've spoken to so many people since then who have shared stories with me that are far worse than mine, that have involved family members who have been victims of actual violence, and have had just so much frustration in trying to get the system to hold those people accountable, and actually see people go to jail, and not be back out within within a couple of days or weeks. So I'm going to keep pushing on this because I think it's really important. We've had way too many stories and way too many tragedies that were avoidable if our system did what it's supposed to do, which is protect people.
For sure. And this is a situation where, in general, I've seen you so many times, especially in the past 12 months or so. It seems like you're getting more and more vocal on these issues. And do you feel at all, as someone who is a mayor of a smaller city, do you feel like you're constantly fighting against the grind or the grain, I should say, in the province of BC, let alone the country? Or do you feel like you're starting to also talk to other mayors and other politicians of other constituencies and areas of the country who also agree with what you're feeling and seeing?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. It often feels lonely. Our whole political system and the climate that surrounds it is very much premised on the idea of go along to get along. Don't poke your head up. Just kind of roll with it. And they have sort of these system of incentives to make that happen, right? So when you're the mayor of a city, you depend on the provincial and federal government for funding for a variety of different things that are important to a community. And more than once, I've had people in the political kind of sphere say to me, well, you should be careful about being so critical because, maybe your community won't get the funding it's looking for. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with other mayors who will come up to me in private in a very quiet voice and say, good job. I agree with you. Keep going. And I've said to many of them, well, why don't you, especially ones that are mayors of bigger cities than Port Coquitlam, you have a big voice. You could have a big platform. You could make a difference. Why don't you speak up? And there's just a real trepidation to do so, because it's kind of like, no, you keep your head down, and then you get support and you get what you want. That being said, I've always felt strong support from the public. I may not win any popularity contests amongst other politicians, which I'm quite fine with, by the way. But I've always felt a great sense of support from the public. And when I, appear on podcasts, like this one, or when I speak out in the media, and as I've been able to grow a platform as well through social media and other mediums, I get messages from all over the country of encouragement. And that means a lot. I'm doing this because this is what I believe in. It's core to my belief system. And I don't always hear others articulating this perspective. And I think it needs to be part of our discourse. And that's why I do it. I think it's the right thing to do. But it certainly is encouraging when I get messages of support from other Canadians, because I think, as is the case with the vast majority of things, the public is always ahead of the politicians. The politicians are the last people to act. And they usually act because they're feeling the heat and they're worried that their ass is going to get tossed out of office. And then so finally they do something, and it's always a half measure, and it's never, and sometimes they just don't follow through. They say the right thing, but they don't do it. But they're always the last to act on any issue that's important to our society. So that's kind of what keeps me going.
For sure. And I try to avoid having fanboy moments when I'm interviewing people, but I'll do it right now. I would say you're probably one of my favorite politicians in the country, bar none, because I think part of the benefit is the fact you are in municipal politics. So you get to kind of shed off the political colors and you're able to focus on the issues that actually impact people. And you clearly take that very seriously. And that's something that I find inspiring, especially in politicians these days who aren't afraid to show a little bit of courage. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to quote, you made an X post back in July, which definitely got a lot of people's attention. And I quote says, "One of the most remarkable things I've observed during my time in elected office is how easily our weak ass legal system gets manipulated and exploited by those causing unbelievable harm to this country. From corporate crime to the most depraved, unforgivable acts, is there a more lenient place on earth to get away with it than Canada?" Which that caught a lot of people's attention. And just recently, this week, we had Justice Minister Sean Fraser recently announced that they're looking at bail reform and other methods to start looking at the overall federal laws in our country in terms of when it comes to reoffenses and things of that nature. From your perspective, from, I don't know, a measure of 1 to 10, how high is your hopeful meter when you heard that announcement?
Can I go below 0?
Okay.
I hate to be pessimistic, and that's not my nature. I'm optimistic, and I think you have to keep, because if you give up, then they win. But I'm more than a little bit skeptical that the same people who have presided over a system that has been orientated towards the offender have all of a sudden seen the light and are now making a genuine attempt to reform it. Again, to my earlier comment, what I think is happening is they're feeling the heat. And so it's a lot of smoke and mirrors is my concern, is to tinker around the edges and not have the kind of deep and meaningful and, top down, bottom out, 360 degree reform that I think is necessary. Because, yes, it's not only around bail reform, but it also gets to sentencing as well in terms of length of sentencing. Our system is by design focusing on trying to not have people incarcerated. There are some individuals who have to be because they represent such an ongoing and clear threat to the safety of others. And when you have a system that prioritizes release and short sentences and bail, as in many cases as possible, you see what we get. It's the revolving door, in and out, in and out, in and out. And the reality is that we're talking about a very small percentage of the population. I talked to the police here in Port Coquitlam, and they'll anticipate when robberies are going to go up, when they're going to see a spike in break and enters or theft from vehicle or theft of property or shoplifting or any number of things, because they know who's doing it. And they pick the guy up, they arrest him, he goes through the system, goes to jail, he's in there for a little bit. Well, he's in there, things are pretty good, and then he comes out and then goes right back at it. And so this is sort of the merry-go-round that we're on. So there's a whole thing around sentencing. There's a whole thing around the orientation of the system. I think one of the discussions that we need to have in this country as well, and it may be a hard one for some people, is we have a judiciary that is just completely out of touch with reality. I mean, some of these decisions that judges are making are just defy any logic or common sense. And I think it's because many of them are quite removed from the consequences of their decisions. We had a horrific case in British Columbia in Kelowna where a woman was killed in broad daylight with a hammer by an ex boyfriend, I think in this case, who just earlier that day had been released from a prior thing. And the first thing that person does is go and kill this woman. These stories, unfortunately, are not just aberrations. This is not like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. This, just completely out of the blue. These are things that are happening with too much regularity. And they should not be just dismissed as, oh, well, that's the exception. No, too often it's becoming the rule. And so that's why I think the reform that's required is much deeper and more comprehensive than I have any confidence that the government is going to pursue.
For sure. So from your estimation, it would be, at some point in time, I'm sure a lot of Canadians feel this way, is a swap up of staff who are overseeing this might be helpful at some point. But in this case, we're in a minority government and we have what we have. From your perspective, what can a common person do to help, as you say, increase that fire to get these politicians to do something about what people are facing?
Well, I think it's important to be active and be involved. And I know people have very busy lives, and family is rightly your first and foremost priority. But the status quo thrives when people are not involved. And that means voting. It means expressing your opinion and perspectives, trying to hold elected officials accountable. It means talking to other people. There's this can be this feeling of a disinterest in politics for a lot of people, and they kind of just throw their hands up and it just all seems like, it's beyond saving. But that's exactly what the status quo is counting on, is for people just to kind of wash their hands of it, because they're going to stay engaged and involved in it. And you know, I wasn't always interested in politics, but I remember my grandfather saying to me once, this always stuck with me. He said, "You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you." And the decisions that are made are going to have a profound impact on our communities and our society. And if you're going to be a part of that, then you should have your say. So, I, you know, it's probably pretty simple, but it's about being involved and being active, an active citizen, and having citizenship really means something. And to me, it means voting. It means being involved in public discourse and talking to our friends and family, especially those who maybe aren't following things as closely as we might.
And I kind of want to go back to just the start of the conversation there, where you talked about an event that took place, and essentially the CCP was essentially trying to lobby different political officials here. Remind me, what year was that when that story took place?
That was in 2019.
19.
Yeah.
So has anything like that happened since? Any more of those events?
Well, it happens under the radar now. Because I mean that's the amazing thing about much of this is like it's just right out in the open, for everyone to see. But it was kind of normalized as, oh yeah, well of course we're going to have this engagement. Of course we're going to take their money and let them sponsor it, and and prior to my time, I'm aware that they were even taking politicians at every level on trips to China, all sponsored and paid for and everything. So like they have a plan. Like you have to give them credit. Like they're very sophisticated about this, and so they haven't gone away. Foreign interference continues to be a very serious issue in this country at all levels. In many respects, the municipal level is the easiest point of entry for them, because there's not the same level of sophistication and attention as there is at a provincial or federal level. So they focus a lot of their attention on the municipal level of government. The big kind of in-your-face event that they used to host, that's gone because basically I shamed them into saying, okay, we're not going to take their money anymore. We're not going to do this event anymore. And they haven't done it since. But I'm under no illusion that there's still not engagement that occurs. And I think we've seen a number of very well documented incidents of foreign interference in our country.
And I mean, I know you've you've been in politics for a good amount of time now. Like from your perspective, for what like how long has this been going on for, you think? How long has the CCP been infiltrating at the municipal level and trying to impact our politics here?
Well, I think from the 90s onward, when both the United States, and particularly the United States, but Canada, well, I guess I will describe this, when the Western world really began to normalize its trade relations with China, and China was permitted entry into the World Trade Organization, and you had a lot of trade agreements that were signed, and you had a real deeper economic integration between North America and China. What coincides with this time is the Chinese government beginning to grow its influence and soft power in our decision making. And so it's been through various means. It's not only at a government level, it's at an academia level. They have Confucius Institutes, which were a lot of those have fallen out of favor again because of public exposure. But I mean, they were all over the place in terms of universities, and even secondary school, public schools. So you have it in academia, you have it in business. There continues to be a very significant entanglement between the Chinese Communist Party and various corporate interests in Canada. The Canada-China Business Council is kind of the mouthpiece in this country for it. So from that period on, it just has gone deeper and deeper and deeper. I sense that because there's been so much exposure and because people are now calling it out, they're trying to go under the radar a little bit and maybe it's not as in your face, but don't doubt for a second that it's still there and that it won't come roaring back when the coast is clear.
Wild. Yeah, this is something that caught my attention. I was visiting Toronto last month and saw branches for the Bank of China around Toronto. And I saw they have multiple locations around the country, which I thought was very fascinating since I don't see a whole lot of Bank of Americas around Canada. So I just thought that was just more so an interesting thought or realization that I had. I was like, oh, I didn't know we had those here. But for when it comes to dealing with this, you actually did a pretty great article in the Bureau talking about just what's been going on in BC with housing and the crime that's been, the crime lords have used real estate in BC to kind of hide their money and this, that, the other. And you ended off that article saying BC can either confront these realities now or wait until the market forces a reckoning upon us. One path allows for a managed strategic shift toward long-term prosperity. The other leaves us at the mercy of the same house of cards economics that has collapsed elsewhere. Only this time, we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. So from your perspective, how does BC get out of this? Like, how in the Vancouver area and like the real estate across the country, essentially, but in this case, BC?
Well, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be overnight, and it's not going to be without some impact. And that often becomes the excuse as to why we should just continuing doubling down on the path that we're on, because it'd be hard to change course. It's going to take some time. There'll be some impact. Yeah, well, we also didn't get to where we are overnight either. And it's also having a very significant impact on people's livelihood. Um, you know, BC used to be synonymous with robust resource industry, manufacturing, advanced technology. That used to be the basis of our economic prosperity, and it employed people in good jobs that paid good wages. You could raise a family on. And slowly but surely, it has been replaced by an economy that is so dependent on real estate. In fact, about 30% of BC's GDP is tied to real estate and its ancillary uses. That is profoundly unhealthy and lacks any sort of balance. And what it has dictated is this addiction to mass immigration, because you have to keep feeding the beast, right? It can't stop. You always have to be feeding it. And what we have seen over the last, say 5 years is just an unprecedented level of population growth in Metro Vancouver, specifically in British Columbia, and of course in Canada as well. And I think in large part that has been because they're just trying to keep propping up the real estate economy. And so we do have the opportunity to get to a more balanced and healthy place. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be a role for immigration and for home building. There always has been, there will be, but man alive, we have got to get it to a place where we are not on this roller coaster where we're going to live or die by our ability to bring in a million plus people every single year. That is a recipe for disaster, and we're seeing that. Look at all the consequences that we've seen in BC in particular. Our hospitals are basically at a breaking point. It used to be that you go to the ER, yeah, you may have to wait a couple hours, but you get in there. Now, if you can be seen in under 10 hours, you count yourself lucky. Some ERs are completely closed for long stretches. In our schools, your kid is more likely or just as likely to be in a portable as a classroom. Things that used to be, the aberration rather than the norm are all upside down. So there's been massive impacts to that. So, how do we get to a more balanced place? Well, first, I think it means we do need to reduce, and and there's a lot of discussion about this right now about reduction and I kind of term it in as immigration, but there's so many different streams. They've got international students, they've got non-permanent residents, they got temporary foreign workers, and then they have your more traditional immigration uh, uh, streams as well. But we have to bring those levels back down to a norm, a more balanced a more balanced number. The other piece is we have to, in my view, unshackle uh, the prosperity that we have all around us. I mean, Canada, British Columbia is blessed with an abundance of natural resources that most places around the world would kill for. And yet we have engaged in this sort of unilateral disarmament where I don't know if it stems from a sense of moral superiority or what it is, but you know, we think that um, we think nothing of the fact that in much of the world, they're building cold power. They run on cold power energy. All sorts of of activity, which is quite polluting and has no sense of standards around labor rights or the environment or anything. Um, and yet we'll sit idly by and just we take this approach that, well, we can't possibly develop our own resources. And again, you see a shift in tone from politicians around that, but it's also the same politicians that for the better part of a decade or so have been preaching the exact opposite of what they say now. So at some point it's like, how much trust do you have and confidence that there is going to be a change? So those are elements of it that I think need to be in place. And again, I would just emphasize that we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to be able to turn the ship overnight either. But by God, I think we need to begin to do that, and try, because carrying down the same path, I think, is going to lead to a very bad place for our people.
Last question, just for the sake, this might be too heavy. You can totally ignore it. This might be too heavy as we end off. But when it comes to what's happening with 100% EV tariffs, right? We put on China, and that response says, "Well, we're going to tariff your canola." So we have this whole dispute happening between us and China. If you're in the decision seat right now, how are you trying to manage this? Because you've talked about the history that China's had here and what they've been doing here, and now this confrontation is happening. What are you, if you're in the decision making seat, what are you doing to try and deal with this?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the mistakes that's being made, and I hear a chorus of voices around this, because of the challenges that Canada is experiencing right now with the United States as it relates to tariffs, you get a chorus of people who have just been salivating to get back to what they would view as the good old days of like full economic dependency on China. And so right away, they see this as an opportunity. Aha, you see, the United States is unreliable. We got to get back into bed with the Chinese Communist Party, and that should be our economic future, which I think is very short-term thinking. Um, you know, Canada is always going to have a very robust economic relationship with the United States. And for most of our time, that has been relatively stable. Now, President Trump is obviously has a view that that relationship and the United States' trading relationships around the world has been out of balance and disordered, and he's acting, some would say, in a very aggressive way. I think you could you could give him that, to do what they believe is a level of rebalancing. Um, I just think the idea that somehow we are not going to have an economic relationship with the United States is completely wrong. Um, where I tend to look at it is where are the opportunities for greater economic relationships with those nations that could be broadly described as sharing our values, and that they're democracy, they believe in the rule of law, they have standards, and they're not trying to constantly rip you off, which is what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing. I mean, the illegal dumping into our country. I mean, they have a horrible rap sheet when it comes to various economic activity that they have undertaken that has been to our detriment for many years. So, whether that's Western Europe, the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, there does need to be a greater emphasis placed on finding those opportunities. But I'll come back to this piece as well. One of our greatest opportunities is the pieces that we have been very reticent to develop, which is our natural resource sector. So I think it's a combination of seeking those greater relationships, understanding that due to proximity, size, integration, and history, there is going to be an economic relationship with the United States, notwithstanding the current challenges that exist. But really, it's understanding where is our advantage as a nation, and how can we develop that in a way that is going to create broad-based prosperity for our people. And it, in my view, is largely in our natural resource sector, which I would like to see us have the ability to create more value add out of, so that you can increase employment, and we can be a country that once again makes things, and isn't just this kind of doormat that allows a Chinese Communist Party or other countries to take our resources, off they go, and then we bring them back into in the finished product. So
Yeah.
there's a lot there, but that's that would be the direction I would try to set for us.
That makes sense. So it's essentially what it's almost like the different version of Carney's approach of him talking about we're going to stop relying so much on the US and we're going to go to other places. You're the same perspectives. Like we need to become less reliant on China as well and move to see other markets. Is that what I'm understanding you explain there?
I think that about sums it up. You've
Gotcha.
done it in 10 seconds instead of my 10 minutes.
Dude, we love the detail. We love it so much. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you're super busy to have this chat. It really means a lot to our listeners, and we all love you, man. Keep up the great work and keep up what you're doing over there in BC.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor for me to be able to be on your show, and just want to say, you keep going as well. I love what you do. I love the engagement that you get, and you're bringing to light things that are really consequential to the future of this country. And so I appreciate what you do for us, and thank you very much for having me.